Well, good morning, folks. In this Leading Your Best Life, I'm talking again with Bryn Edwards. And Bryn and I had a conversation a couple of weeks ago now talking about psychology and organizational psychology and a whole range of areas. But Bryn and I were talking at the coffee shop the other day about this area we called the wounded healer. So, Bryn, welcome back to Leading Your Best Life, mate.
Thank you, Lee. Thank you for having me back.
Now, this wounded healer idea got to me because we know so many people are getting into coaching, consulting, training, wanting to help people in whether it be mental health or a whole range of areas. And we talked about people we knew, and including myself, and we were all on our own journey of evolution. And you go, why does a person get into coaching? Why does a person get into consulting? And often it's because they want to save the world or help others. It might have come from a family background. So from your point of view, let's first of all define this idea of the wounded healer. What are your thoughts around that?
Yeah, look, in essence, a wounded healer is somebody who's not yet completed their healing journey, and yet, and as a consequence of that, they still carry the emotion, the charge, the patterns of the original thing that caused some sort of wounding. And as a result of that, they want to go and, you used a really good word, save the world. Because in saving the world, they avoid having to face it themselves.
Okay.
So, yeah, I mean, look, I think it is a really important conversation to have, because you rightfully picked up in the intro there that there's a lot more people getting into the coaching, mental health first aid, and all of that area, right? And I got exposed a lot to this when I ran my WA Real podcast, where I had over 200 conversations with long form conversations with different people. And I spoke to many mindset coaches, business coaches, all sorts of different aspects of wellness coaches, experts, psychologists, counselors, people who ran mental health community groups, people who ran mental health charities, men's work, women's work, all of it. And quite a few of them, a number of them, I actually pursue, having got a connection with them and listened to what they were doing, I actually pursued some of what people were offering, with time, money, effort, resources, whatever it may be. And I kept recognizing that it would help to a certain degree, but then it would all run aground again. And so I think it's a really important conversation to have. It's a difficult conversation to have because, it's within our human nature to want to help and look after our fellow, brothers and sisters, right? So who are you to come in here now and say, and I'm not going to say shouldn't be doing it, but, interpret what I'm saying as shouldn't be doing it or something like that. But we also need to separate out the difference between intent and impact, because by and large, all those people that I spoke to, all those people that I interviewed, all those people that I, interact with subsequently, right? Their intention is gold. It comes from the heart, right? They want to do good. So I'm not throwing shade on any of that, but it's the impact of this, right? And I think if more people understood where they were on their own journey to cleaning up, the stuff that we've all encountered through life, right? And understand as well some of the bigger cultural forces that probably that start to play in this, and I'll talk about that in a minute, then we can be a little bit more honest about where we are and what we're offering, right? So that we can have the best impact we can within the place that we're in. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah,
because you've made a whole range of points there. As you say, some of the emotional charge is still there.
Mm,
The cleaning up, what triggered it in the first place? I mean, straight away,
yeah,
I go back to why did Lee get into wanting to save the world in terms of fitness? Was my dad had this genetic condition called myotonia dystrophia.
yeah,
And it was only as I've got older and older, I realised how traumatic it was for us as a family growing up,
yeah,
seeing dad not be able to work, the struggle with money, and all of those things. And then you go, well, okay, what happens when you do go into change or coaching situations? Yes, you say with that intent, with that programming that you've come from, but at the same time, you go, in my case, what work did I do on myself to clean up that mess? And I was opposed to a certain extent,
yeah,
I still need to do more work in that area,
yeah,
even though, yes, I've had an impact, but I know at times, as you say, coming back to emotional charge, there's various times I can be in the middle of a talk and talk about something and all of a sudden go, why am I in the process of almost crying or actually even tearing up at that point in time? And so
exactly.
let's talk about that as a healer. And I remember once, I think it was Pat Mesiti, one of the speakers, saying, "Don't talk about something that you're still in the process of going through the journey of,
Yeah,
whether it be health or fitness, or whether it be relationship or marriage breakdown, or money and going broke, or whatever it is. It's like ideally." You've already got to the mountaintop, as in you've climbed the mountain before you go back and start telling other people how to do it. Versus still
100%.
halfway up it. So, what are your thoughts and comments on that?
Well, there are a couple of things. I mean, one of the biggest questions, look, one of the biggest questions we have to ask right at the start here, and it's like I like my fundamental underlying questions, right, and assumptions, because if we get that in place, then it shapes the whole conversation.
Mm,
And the biggest question is, do you believe that you can heal from significant trauma, abuse, and significant life events? Right. Now, I purposely asked, do you believe that? The next question is do you know that you can?
mm,
And knowing means that you have done that yourself.
mm, mm,
Right. And if you don't believe that, then what are we doing? Then we're just managing stuff.
mm,
Okay. And again, okay, I'm splitting hairs and making nuance, but if you believe you can, if you can believe that you can heal, then that demonstrates that you have hope,
mm,
right? But you're not there. If you don't believe it, then we're managing symptoms. And do you know, as in, have you done it? Right. Now, there are three things, right? But that will have a very significant driving force on the thing that you're offering to the world, right? And so that we need to put that in its place as well. But I think if we can just dial out a little bit more, just to put some surrounding context around this, we generally live in a because you asked about emotional charge, and I think that's a
mm.
really important part. We generally live in an emotionally avoidant society, right?
What do you
We
mean by that? What do you mean by that? What do you mean by emotionally avoidant? What does that look like or
Right.
sound?
So emotions are supposed to flow through us, right? We're supposed to acknowledge, express, and release them, right? And let them go through. We are emotional beings, right? It's happening whether you like it or not. It's just part of our nature. This whole thing of, oh, I'm a rational person, not a feeling person, it is rubbish, right? You are rational and you are feeling, right? From a very early age, we get taught that some emotions are welcome and some emotions are not. The
Mm,
first one that we probably get taught is not welcome is probably something like anger when kids are having tantrums, right? And so more and more different emotions become less welcome and less socially acceptable in the world,
mm,
right?
mm,
And
mm,
so we cover them up and cover them up and cover them up and cover them up,
mm,
right? And this is part of our culture, right? It's part of how we do things, right? I don't think we're having a mental health crisis at the moment. I think we're having an emotional health crisis.
mhm, mhm, mhm,
People talk a lot about overthinking. And in our last conversation, I pointed out that overthinking is generally underfeeling.
mm, mm,
And this is a shared thing. It's normalized, it's institutionalized, it's within our culture, right? And this is happening all of the time. And so as a result, we avoid emotions, we minimize the impact of certain events. I mean, emotions are an amazing communication to what's the reality of our experience, right? And they just are. But we minimize the impact. Start to emotionally numb out. We rationalize stuff. We like to control and manage. The whole of the sort of EQ drive is very much around rationalizing emotions. And you can't rationalize emotions. They're pre-verbal, right? We have to feel them, right? And they're happening all the time, right? And so we keep trucking on and we keep trucking on and we keep trucking on in this very emotionally avoidant way.
Well,
Right.
if you take it, all the things that boys are taught, big boys don't cry,
Yeah.
take a concrete ball, mate, don't be such a pussy,
Yeah.
growl
Yeah.
phone, mate. What are you gonna put on a bloody pink nappy, or all the different things guys say to each other in that.
Oh, and a lady in a workshop that I ran over in Sydney a couple of weeks ago told us about how in the workplace she was frequently told to, why don't you go to the fridge and get a can of Toughen the Fuck Up and drink it?
Yeah, right. Wow.
you
Wow.
know and so this is where we live in a very rationalized, institutionalized, industrialized and individualized society, right? And that's
Bill, can I just say, Bill Burr, one of the American comedians the other day, did this whole thing I watched where he talked about, in the past, a man was only allowed to have two emotions of either angry, like bloody really pissed off, or I'm okay, I'm fine.
yeah.
And he said he was off the road for 5 or 6 weeks, and he found himself just sitting watching TV all day. And eventually one day his wife said, "What's wrong with you?" And he goes, "I'm actually sad." And she went, "What? What?" Like you'd never heard him use that word before, coming back to emotionally avoidant. So as
Yeah.
you say, it's quite common, particularly for men, but probably women as well. You
Oh,
can't,
all of it.
don't show emotion.
All of us. Anger's a great one, right? I only had a chat this morning with a lady and I sort of said, have you acknowledged how angry you are about this situation?
Mm-hmm.
She was like, yeah, I'll probably need to do that. It's like, well, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And this stuff like lingers around, right? And it
Yeah.
builds up and it builds up and it builds up and it starts to cloud how we think, the decisions we make, the behavior, why we do certain things. I mean, for me, there is a big correlation between the fact we avoid emotions, and particularly anger and stuff like that. Yeah, drinking's quite prevalent in our culture too, which is,
Mm-hmm.
drinking is an amazing way of emotionally, suppressing stuff, right?
Yes.
So look, we keep trucking on in this way, right? Because
Because you talk about acknowledge. So let's just say this person this morning, okay, I acknowledge I'm angry, but how does she then express that? What does that mean in terms of acknowledge, express, release?
yeah, well, look, yeah, all right, we can do that now.
Mm.
In order, acknowledging is acknowledging the fact that you're actually
I'm
feeling.
angry. I'm sad. I'm
Yeah,
feeling depressed. Yeah, I'm having a down day today. Yeah.
expressing is taking, emotions are like energy that's in your body, right? And it
Mm,
needs to flow. If it doesn't
mm,
flow,
yeah.
right, it gets
Mm,
stuck, and it gets stuck in the body, and it's no surprise that we end up, given the stressful world that we live in, it's good to be in the business of looking after people's necks, back, and shoulders, right? Because that's where we
mm.
store a lot of our tension, right?
Yes.
And again, this is emotion that's not moved, right? So in order to express it, we have to take what's going on out and give it physical form in a very non-verbal way, right?
Mm,
So whether that's movement, whether that's put it into art form, whether that's, I don't know, writing poetry, dance, music. I mean, some of the workshops we run, we get people to listen to a few different songs that have a range of emotions in, and we get people to say, what's really, really going on in this song?
mm,
Right. And just getting people to work out, oh, what's really going on underneath. So, but here's one of the key things, right? You can't rationalize emotions, right? And
mm,
what's one of our rational tools? Talking about things.
mm, mm,
Right. So to go and have a 50-minute one-way conversation where you're asked, tell me how you feel about this,
mm,
isn't going to do the job. Right. So the purpose of expressing is to take what's energetically inside of you, outside of you, so you can look at it and see it. You're no longer in it, you're out of it, looking at it, and then you can make a conscious decision to let it go.
mhm.
Right. And then when you let it go, then you can see the situation for what it really is. However, we don't live in a society that does that, right? We we don't really we're not great at acknowledging what's really going on for us. Okay. And even if we do, sometimes our friends will cover over and go, "Oh no, mate, let's have another beer," or I'll take you out and jolly you up, right? As opposed to just allowing someone to sit in it and acknowledge it. And then when it comes to expressing, what are we told to do most of the time? We'll go and talk about it. Talk about it isn't really going to help you in this pre-verbal unconscious thing that's going on, let alone how do you let it go, right? So people keep trucking along in this way, and this is, getting back to how do we end up with wounded healers? But then because all of this is going on anyway, and we're building up all these emotional responses to things that never go away anywhere, right? Then all of a sudden, life conspires to produce events in our lives, right? And I've talked a bit about this in a short ebook that I've just finished writing. And, they can be, you can have a personal crisis, like losing a job that you've had for years, the unexpected breakup of marriage, stuff like that. You can have profound grief or loss when somebody you love dies. You can be having near-death experience or existential confrontation. I think we all had that during COVID. People can just have a breakdown. But then there are some great stuff as well. You can have peak experiences of awe and wonder. You can have an intense love and connection. Some people have these moments of seeing through it all when they take psychedelics or meditating. Some people just get this subtle accumulation. And what these life events end up forcing us to do is pushing us into the swamp of all our feelings.
The swamp of all our feelings, yes.
Yeah. Right. And these events conspire to push us out of our avoidant place and into all of our feelings. Right. And all of a sudden, it's not just the response to one thing, it's a response to many, 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 many things all at once. And
because it's all built up inside you.
100%. Right. And then it all starts to come out. Right. And then this can be overwhelming, like it's a massive abyss. Right. And, you've spent most of your life in a culture that rationalizes stuff and avoids emotions. You don't realize you're doing it, but you're doing it. So all of a sudden you're dropped in the swamp, with no tools to swim to the other side, which is the final destination to get to. And so what do? We find ways to go back to our avoidant self, right?
Yes, and one of the ways, of course, avoiding self is from one other podcast where alcohol, as we say, numbs and dumbs it. Numbs it, numbs it. So alcohol just helps you kick the can down the road. You've numbed and dumbed the issues and the stress or the upset, and as you say, the swamp of emotion, to another day when, even worse, if you've now got a hangover, you're even in less of a resourceful state to deal with it. Yeah.
Yeah, but there are plenty of other things that we can do. There's plenty of other things that we can do to rationalize our way back out of this swamp of feelings, right? And take ourselves back to our place of comfortable avoidance, as opposed to swimming by acknowledging, express, releasing, swimming to the other side of this swamp, to the place where, we talked about this emotional charge. By acknowledging, expressing, and releasing it, we can actually let it go from us, right? But here's the challenge, right? The bulk of people that I've encountered have had a significant experience, like I've just explained, right? And they have been forced into this swamp of feelings, right? As a result of life events.
Yeah.
And they've managed to survive that in a way, but they have managed to get themselves back to their place of avoidance as opposed to moving all the way through it, which, to actually swim headlong into the charge is one of the most counterintuitive things that we can do given our cultural background, right?
Yes.
And so that person will regain a sense of safety and clarity in the world, right? But like I said, they'll still carry the charge of that event. They'll still carry the emotional charge of the unsung swim, swim, right?
Yes.
And then over time, they will start to encounter other people who are in a similar situation of being, thrust into the swamp of feelings,
Mm.
and that will bring it all back up for them, and then
Right.
want to go and save them.
Yes, yes, interesting. Let me just do a couple of things here.
Yeah,
As
yeah,
you're
sure.
talking, this life stress events, just so that people know, we know, I've just dug up that Holmes and Rask scale, which you'd be well aware of, where they literally showed, and a whole lot of research has been done around this in terms of, as you say, death of a spouse is 100 points, divorce is
Yep.
73 points, marital separation 65, detention. So it goes all the way through, and we know that when these scores add up, person's more likely to have a health problem, more likely to have clearly a mental health problem, as in some kind of emotional breakdown or breakthrough. We know they have more accidents at work. So, as you say, these things have been well researched. So it doesn't take too much to go, okay, how am I scoring in life right now? And that being the case, what have I done to actually, as you say, acknowledge, express, and release this situation?
The emotional response to these naturally occurring life events, right?
Yeah,
And
there's
bearing in mind that the ones you brought up here are like significant events, but let's not minimize the incidental everyday ones that are occurring all day, every day.
argument with the boss or the coach
Yeah.
tells you've just stuffed up, or
Yeah. Or somebody
in the
screws up
traffic,
your
someone
coffee
cuts you off in
order, or
traffic. Yeah.
yeah, somebody screws up your coffee order, or you drop your coffee, or yeah, all of the things, right?
Yeah.
Because it's all happening. This is the key point, Lee. It's
Yeah.
all happening, and you're having a response to it, whether you choose to acknowledge it or not, right? If you want to pretend that it's not happening, crack right on. But at some point, all of these responses will need to be dealt with, right?
Yes.
And so, like I said, it's our incumbent surrounding cultural norm to avoid this stuff or minimize it or
Mm,
rationalize it,
mm, mm,
anything but actually swim headlong into
mm,
what
mm.
needs to actually happen. And so as a result, we'll find that people have faced significant life events. They've managed to weather a bit of exposure to the swamp of feelings. They'll have found their way back to a place of the cultural safe place where we can avoid this stuff, right? And then because they still have the charge, right, they'll feel this compulsion to go and save the world. And what they're doing is by saving others, they're avoiding having to face it themselves,
Yes. Yes. Yes.
right?
Yes. Yes.
Which then is a recipe for chaos.
Mm,
And yeah, and the other interesting thing, I mean, you'll be aware of the drama triangle,
yeah.
right?
I'll do that. I'll dig it in.
With the
Yes.
with the helper, the victim, and the perpetrator,
Yes.
right?
The drama triangle. I'll bring it up because, as you said, it's such a critical, important model. The Karpman drama
Yeah.
triangle. It is there.
It's the
So
source of pretty much 98% of all the drama in families and workplaces.
yes. Yes. There it is. There.
And there
Beauty
we go, a
research.
rescuer, right? So this is how our wounded healer enters the drama triangle by becoming the rescuer.
I'm going to
Because
save you. Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
going to save you from the pain that I am yet to face, acknowledge, express, and let go of. Right?
Mm,
I'll come and try and help you to do it
mm, mm,
rather than me, right?
mm.
Or help you to swim back to a culturally safe place of avoidance.
Yes. 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 Yes.
And so what they end up offering in the world is how to deal with the event, not how to actually deal with the deluge of emotions that has broken the dam.
Yes, yes. So as you say, it's that event which actually may be getting sacked, but in fact, there's a whole lot of other things going on there in
100%.
terms of Holmes and Ra. Like I think back, one of my very good mates was sacked and had a major breakdown. But in fact, in the context of this, it had a marital separation, certainly a divorce. And if we went back through in terms of relationship with mother, father, and a range of other things, let alone whatever went on in childhood, and certainly if I go back, troubles with
Yeah.
books and a range of other things, there are a whole range of issues there, of which the dam burst because he got fired. But it
Yeah.
was a whole range of other stuff that needed to be dealt with. And of course,
Yeah.
then if he makes his boss the prick and getting fired as the issue, but in fact, there's a whole range of other things that needed to be looked at. There were a range of pain points going back as far as being 3 or 4 and relationship with mother and father. What are your comments
100%.
there?
100%. So what we're now into now is underneath all of that, I mean, I've placed emotions underneath that sort of rationalizing thinking, right? But now we're going underneath the emotions, right, into the inherent patterns that people have maladapted into their life in order to get themselves through difficult situations, and usually through childhood and stuff like that. And the result of that is a whole lot of unprocessed, unacknowledged emotions, right? And all this is going on in the unseen 90% of people's unconscious, right? And this is the stuff that is not acknowledged and not dealt with by a bulk of the people that I was meeting and have met, who put themselves into coaching, counseling, mental first aid training, positions, right? And they all have awesome intent. Don't get me wrong. And I'm not questioning anyone's intent, right?
Yeah.
It is human nature to want to go and help and look after our brothers and sisters here, But it's this impact, because if you're still carrying that charge, if you've not completed the fullness of that journey, you are still trying to save somebody. You are still trying to help somebody avoid. And so you are in effect replicating your patterns onto other people, right? And it's your patterns that got you in that place in the first place, that meant that you weren't actually acknowledging the full trueness of what was going on in your life up until the point that significant event broke the dam, right? And people are trying to offer help and support in relation to those events, manage those events. So again, we're into managing, as opposed to what's going on underneath this. Now, this raises another bigger question, Lee, is, well, why is this? Why is this? I mean, I've already asked the question at the start. Can you heal from the marks left from trauma, abuse, and significant life events? Yes, you can. You can, right? But in order to do that, you do need a pretty comprehensive and integrated framework of how humans, how humans function and how we grow, based on us as living organisms, right?
Yeah.
And unfortunately, what we have as well, because we have a business here as well, is we have incentives for people to sell techniques and parts of the journey to heal. And I could go and learn a technique this weekend and be a practitioner of it next week.
Well, it's funny, mate. I was watching the front bar the other night, and Lawrence, one of the comedians, was taking off the fact, they said, and now it's Dr. whatever his name was from the AFL. It's the mindset coach from the AFL. And he jokingly said, if you're a doctor, you have to spend 6-10 years at university. A plumber, you've got to do 4 or 5 years of an apprenticeship. But to be a mindset coach, you just have to go to the local printer and get a business card with the word mindset coach on the card.
Yeah.
And that is part of the problem, in that, as you say, you can literally get involved in this area by going to the local printer versus, okay, what training have you had? And as you say, it's not only understanding of models, and as there's a whole range of models, whether it be NLP or a whole range of different mechanisms, but at the same time, more to the point, your point, which is, what healing have you done on yourself?
Yeah.
Versus by doing an NLP course and calling myself a coach, by healing others, I'm healing myself. But no, as we say, you're a wounded healer, or you haven't completed a journey yourself, and now you're going out into the world. And I've got to say, there are well-intentioned mates of mine. In fact,
100%.
one mate of mine, Dr. Peter Simons, had a breakdown of some kind, and he'd written a book called Brain Fuel Depletion, because he wanted to understand from a scientific model the neurotransmitters, serotonin, dopamine, and he literally has spent the last 15 to 20 years helping as many people as he can, at least them understand their condition. And yes, he in the book talks about meditation and a range of other things, but that very point of, yes, but what are some of those? And of course, I'm watching a guy on YouTube at the moment, I think Peter Crone, his name is, starts to talk about belief systems and conditioning and so on. He calls himself a mindset coach to Hollywood stars and all of those kinds of things. And again, he talks about going through the journey of having a breakup with a woman that he thought he was going to marry, and that became the beginning of him going through his healing journey. And he does talk about his healing journey, but we went to a big important seminar only a few months ago, which was on men's mental health. And in the men's mental health, everybody getting up talking about mental health only talked about their story, and at no point in any of those conversations did they actually talk about what they did to heal or deal with or go through their journey. At no point was there was a before, and in most cases there was no discussion of triggering, although one of the guys I think talked about his soccer coach committing suicide, and that then got him going, what the hell, and wanting to understand, and to a certain extent, in fact, the guy's doing a PhD in the area of men's mental health now. But at no point did people say, these are the steps I went through to begin healing myself. And can I just say, one of the models, of course, that are quite common is this hero's journey, where somewhere in there's the mentor, the helper, there's an abyss, there's the transformation, and there's the atonement. But to a certain extent, even if these guys at the front of the room talked about the abyss that they were in at some point, but steps they took in transformation and who and how they used helpers and mentors, that would have been of some use. But essentially, they kind of just talked about stumbling in and around that abyss, or what you talk about, the swamp of emotion. What are your thoughts and comments to what I've just talked about?
Yeah, look, there's a number of things, right? There is a number of things in response to that. I think you're absolutely right. So the listener to this will probably be asking, all right, Bryn, well, who are you? What did you clean up? What's your journey, right? And to your point, so I went to an English boys boarding school from the age of 8 to 18, which left a significant mark upon how I did life, how I did relationships, how I did friendships, and all sorts. Right, and to your point, I was in a Facebook group of about 7,000 or 8,000 people actively participating and it was called Boarding School Survivors, right?
Wow.
And I had to leave after a while because it was good to start with, to see other people's stories of, I had a shit time there too. And it has impacted my life for the last 20, 30 years, right? But I had to leave after a while because I was like, well, have we got any healing stories in here? I've just got showed a book. I just got showed a book about boarding school trauma, right? And in it is a series of essays from various different clinicians and stuff like that. And I sort of saw it on LinkedIn because somebody pointed me towards it. And I sort of said to the author, I said, do you have a final chapter there where you synthesize all of the learnings into a straightforward, into like a universal steps for healing for people with boarding school trauma? And her response was, oh, no, that's, we should be so lucky. These are just reflections. And so to your point, look, and don't get me wrong, I think it's awesome that we're at the point now where we are acknowledging that people have struggles and troubles that are beyond the physical, what we can see, right?
It's not a broken bone, or it's not a
and I think, don't get me wrong, I think it's awesome that we've taken that step across the threshold to get to a place where people say, I am struggling, I'm not okay, I'm down, I'm depressed, I'm sad, I'm this, I'm that, I'm anxious, right? And this is debilitating me and it's curtailing my life. And I think it's awesome that we can now get to a place where we can begin to say that, right? Not everywhere, but we can begin to say that. So I understand why a bulk of the stories are around acknowledging stuff, and that we see great bravery in people standing up and telling the story of how they were struggling, how they had suicidal ideation, how they have had racked by anxiety and depression,
mm,
right? All things that I can resonate with personally. But where to next?
mm. The
Right?
healing story, as you say, the healing journey.
And here's the thing. Rationalizing it is not going to fix it. There's the common stuff that we hear. Make sure you sleep in well. You got a good diet. You're doing exercise. You're talking to friends. You got a good network. Right. That's great. But that is, again, that's top level stuff. Right.
Mm,
That
mm,
helps with the day to day. That's like brushing your teeth. Right.
mm,
But
mm,
every now and again, you got to go in there and deep clean those teeth. And you got to go and see the dentist. Right.
mm, mm,
And here's the other thing: talking about it isn't going to do the job, right?
mm,
So it has to be something bigger, and it has to be more. And you have to. One of the questions because of who I am and what I do, a lot of people will tell me what they're up to, and I get people telling me, oh, I'm an NLP coach, or do tapping, or I do what's the other one?
Could be
Human design,
breath work, yeah.
breath work and stuff like that. And one of the first questions I'll always ask people is how have you applied that to your life to make significant changes in your everyday reality? And by and large, a lot of people will reply to me and goes, oh, it's great because with my clients,
Mm,
right. So it's out there,
mm. It's
right?
not me.
It's not me,
Mm,
right? Because we've all got stuff, right? We've all got stuff that needs to clean up, and we need to acknowledge it and take responsibility of it, all of it,
mm,
and it will come in waves, right? We have every right to be, sad, annoyed, angry, carry guilt, carry some shame, all of this, and it's not going to go anywhere until we fly into that storm.
mm. You got to go into it.
Yeah.
Go into the
And
abyss. Go into the cave.
yeah. And, you mentioned things like NLP and breath work and stuff like that. Like everything. And again, we still haven't got to, well, by and large, most people cannot place those things within a bigger comprehensive framework of human functioning, right? And so the challenge we have is that people don't quite understand the place of what they're offering. And it's important to understand the place of what they're offering because then they can see how far it can go and how far it doesn't go.
Yep.
You
Well,
know,
look,
so
what you're doing here, it's interesting because I can think of at least three people who over the years have immersed themselves in all sorts of reading. And let me just even one recently who has done an NLP master practitioner course and now wants to get everybody else doing NLP courses so that he can teach his course. But this person clearly has so many issues from their own background, and I know their background so well.
yeah,
They are externalizing that process. Well, other people need this. Now that I've learnt it, other people need it versus no. There's a whole lot of self-reflection and, as you say, cleaning up that needs to go on here. And I know a guy, when he's reading books, he's going, oh, people need to know this. People need to know this because he's getting such a thrill of it. But if you actually sat down with him, and again, it reminds me, my one of the housemate here loves watching Married at First Sight. And you watch that show, and there's a particular guy who was on there on this last round, was a wellness advisor.
oh, he was a mess.
This actual
He was a mess.
Did you
He
see?
was a mess.
Yeah. His capacity for feedback and then externalizing and blaming other people for
It was enormous.
shit that he'd done was a classic example of, man, that guy needs not only a wellness advisor, take a damn good look in the mirror, mate. So they're externally, that's a great example of externalizing, telling everyone else what they should do. And, I hope I'm not in that. I mean, I'm sure there's part of it. That's partly me as well, but externalize it rather than, mate, take a look in the mirror. What is life telling you right now? And then as you go going deeper, what are those recurring patterns? Why are these things continue to happen to you? You're at the scene of the crime every time. And I'm talking to myself here as I'm saying it. So what's the healing process? And again, this Peter Crone guy, listening to him, the whole thing around beliefs that have come out of childhood, there are things that, as he said, if you've got a belief system that can build a 2-bedroom house, but you're trying to build a multi-story building, you're going to need to take a look at those, the I'm not good enough, or I've always been poor, or my family.
And what's fueling them?
What's fueling it? So coming back to those healing stories, Bryn, What are some of the processes? Let's say in your case, what did you do to go into that cave, that emotional swamp, and what were the things you did to help clean up, deal with, and what are the things you advise others to do to go into the swamp and clean up?
So look, I was very much heading towards exactly the place that I've just described. Probably about 4 or 5 years ago, I had
Mhm.
this strong sense to want to help, and I had toyed with a few things, and I like we said in the last podcast, I have a degree in psychology. I have a master's in business psych. I have been particularly interested. I've done coaching as part of some of my professional roles and things like that along the journey, where asked. And I wanted a sense of being able to help, and listening, doing the podcast for 4 years gave me a really big insight into what people were up to, but also it gave me an insight into some of the meta patterns that were going on. And yeah, it led me to a lady that I'd mentioned last time, Rosalind Snyder,
Mm.
who I work with for at Wisdom in Your Life here. And I went to a very first 2-day MAP course, which is basically what's the true journey, internal journey, and what's the internal landscape we go through when things change, which they do all the time.
Mm.
And it acknowledges that things change, and some we may have choice or no choice in, but we always end up in the swamp of feelings. And we need to acknowledge, express, release that so that we can get to the other side, which is a place where we can actually reflect before we try new things, and then we make a proper decision, and then we move on again until the next thing changes. And I went into that course thinking, I know a thing or two, and within hours, I sat there and realized, actually, I think I know a lot. I actually do very little in my life, which I think applies to most. We
Mm.
think we know a lot, but we do very little, in terms of actually processing what goes on. And I remember being in the end of midway in the afternoon of the first day, just in the fetal position, sobbing and sobbing and sobbing and sobbing and sobbing. And in after that had finished, thinking, I think there's some signal here.
Mm.
And I remember at the end of that course saying to Roz, how long does it take to train up a trainer to deliver those 2 days? And I was coming from the world of learn a technique, you can bash it out. So I was thinking,
Mm.
4 or 5 weeks, this is pretty cool. It has impact. And her response was, oh, it takes 2 or 3 years. I was like, what? Anyway, as luck would have it, Roz sort of agreed to, well, she didn't agree. I kept turning up, mentoring me over the next 3 years. And she wouldn't let me loose doing anything with the outside world until I had significantly swam the swamp numerous times, dragging up well, not dragging up, but allowing up true responses to things like, well, how did that 8-year-old who got dropped off at boarding school actually feel in the world? Because guess what? He's had that 8-year-old who was confused and sad and a bit angry as well. He's had his hand on the driving wheel of my
Mm.
life.
Mm. Mm.
So yeah, it was a case of acknowledge, express, releasing a lot of stuff that was pretty murky.
Mm.
A lot of the things that I felt guilty about in my life, a lot of the shame, a lot of anger, a lot of sadness, a lot of regret, a lot of resentment, things, and also looking at the patterns that were underneath it and surfacing those and moving those out by using sand tray exercises and things like that. And a lot of other very, very active stuff. That's one of the things I love about what we do here. It's very active. We get people to do activities that surface things from that non-verbal area, and then we get people to reflect on it afterwards. And it's a very different conversation when you're reflecting on an activity
Mm.
that's quite physically engaging. That's why a lot of men actually gravitate to a lot of the work we do, as well as women. Yeah, and it was just doing it and 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 doing it until
Mm.
such point. Roz said to me, I think it's time for you to run your first map course. And that was when I realized, yeah, maybe I'm not a wounded healer and I'm all right to go out in the world.
That you'd literally cleaned up that emotional charge by going over it and
Yeah.
over
And don't get
it.
me wrong, right? I'm not the finished article. There's
No, none
lots,
of us are.
right?
Yeah.
But my capacity to hold space for all sorts of stuff happening, all sorts of stuff is huge now,
Mm,
right? And that's not to say I don't get impacted, but even if I do, I know what I need to do
mm,
to acknowledge, express, release that,
yeah.
right? And get into it. So we're very strict here at Wisdom in Your Life. Anybody who works here, you have to be treading the same path that you're putting your participants through.
Yep.
And we're very strict about that. But we have to be, because otherwise we're contributing to the ever increasing level of chaos that's already in the world.
Mm, mm.
So
Well,
yeah.
I remember in The Sopranos, Tony Soprano's psychiatrist, had an upline. It sounds like within the world of psychology, or at least in that show, that because again, if you're constantly working with people and listening to their emotional
Yeah.
charge, their emotional upset, you're taking it on in one form or another. And so having some way of processing it or dealing with it or releasing it in
Well,
some way.
actually, Lee, here's the thing, right? When you get to a place of significant healing, you don't take on the charge of other people
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
because here's the thing, because A, you have very clear boundaries, and B, you've already cleaned up your emotional charge. So when you can actually sit in the presence of others with theirs,
Yeah.
right? Not taking it on. We only take it on when we still have
Mm.
stuff
When it's
ourselves.
triggering you, when it's
Yeah.
I get it. Okay, yes,
Right. So, and having swum from one side of the swamp of feelings to the other numerous times, I know that everybody's capable of it, even
yes,
if they are drowning at that point in time. Right.
yes, yes,
Sure, I can help them, but I also know that no matter how dark it looks, there is a way from one side to the other. And
yes.
I can't swim it for them. Nobody could do any of my swims for me.
No,
Right.
no.
So that's when you can go to a place of not taking on the charge because someone can get from the other side.
Yes, yes. I'm going to show you an article that a mentor of mine gave me way back. In fact, where is it? It's in Business Directions magazine, which was way back in the 90s. But a mentor of mine by the name of Blair Singer, who was part of Robert Kiyosaki's group, as part of the Money and You program, they introduced us to a concept called perturbation, the process of being perturbed and upset. And invariably, and it's based on work of a fellow by the name of Ilio Prigogine. Prigogine got a Nobel Prize for this back in, I think, 1987. But it's such a fantastic piece. I'm happy to send this to people. But one of the things it talks about in this article is the importance of releasing emotion as part of dealing with pressure. So I'll just go here. If you analyze the performance of most great teams, they come from behind the way John Bertram did, and they use Bertram winning the America's Cup.
Yes.
Getting badly beaten in the early rounds caused many of the teams to circle back as roaring winners. Many directors, successful owners and millionaires I've known have had major setbacks and huge pressures during their childhood and early years. According to these people, this is what's forged them into becoming great achievers. Why then would we want to avoid pressure when we know that it is the way intelligence grows and evolution occurs? It's because of the time of evolution or at the moment that something in the person or organization shift, something scary happens, that is the release of energy. Prigogine found that as a structure became more complex, it also released energy in the form of heat. In humans, this energy is released typically in the form of emotion. In other words, once you understand that, and once you've got your own charge cleaned up, you can sit with someone either being angry or being sad or being anxious or crying, and part of you goes, this is good because they're actually moving forward versus, oh no, because if you've got a whole lot of stuff going on, they're triggering that in you.
Oh shit, they might cry.
What are your thoughts to this?
Yeah. Oh, it's spot on. It's spot on. And it's a lot of what it's basically it's very similar to our direction here at Wisdom in Your Life,
Yeah.
which is it's about being in your emotions
Yeah.
and having them an integrated part of how you function, so that they function in a balanced way alongside your thinking and alongside your behaviors. So
Yeah.
they're all connected and they're all balanced, because when our
Yes.
feelings and our thinking and our behaviors are balanced and connected, we can make the best quality decisions. We can see possibility and probability in our life, and we can really begin to make things happen, which is why you've got at the top there for championship results. When we ignore our emotions, when we go straight for thinking and thinking alone, then stuff gets disconnected and out of balance. And that is the bulk and contaminated. And that is the bulk of the issues with our mental and emotional health problems.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Well,
that,
here, as Blair says, under sustained pressure, there may come confusion, sadness, anger, joy, hilarity, or
yep,
some other emotion. In the Western culture, the display or the experience of emotion is generally not okay, which is exactly what you
yep,
said. As a result, when emotion begins to release, we tend to back away, bottle it up, or shut it down, which
exactly.
goes against nature's way of allowing us to evolve.
Yep,
Unfortunately, in our culture, it's not acceptable to cry, to yell, or admit confusion or upset, or to express it in the workplace, or even worse, the classroom. So here we are saying you need, if you're serious, one, about being a coach or healer, but as a human
yep,
being, to be able to acknowledge, express, and release and process and make it
yep,
safe to do that. And again, certainly at times, as part of that program, we literally said there's an agenda item we would set in business meetings of what I feel like saying. And you want it safe to where I feel like I'm upset or I'm pissed off or this
yep,
is frustrating me. But of course, you can go to 100 companies tomorrow and it's not safe to actually
yeah.
talk about that. What do you think? What are your thoughts to
I,
that?
I think you're absolutely spot on. It's acknowledging what is, rather than trying to cut against the grain and pretend that it's not happening,
Yeah.
right? And the more, working with our emotions, like I said, they are a communication to our they're quite a profound communication and connection to what's really, really occurring in our everyday reality. When we're avoiding this, we're avoiding our connection to what's going on. And that's when we start to detach from reality. And that's very much what we see in society today. And that is the source of these wounded healers. So I guess, we've really touched on a great point. And in that article you mentioned there, it's nature's way, our natural state. I guess one of my biggest questions to anybody who's listened to this far, who is in the coaching, mental health community, is ask yourself, what is where are you actually at? Are you still holding stuff that you avoid, right? And let's just be honest with that, right? And then underneath that is what is your model of how we work? Because everybody needs a fundamental model of how we work, right? And like I said, things like breath work, NLP, a lot of what psychology has to offer, in terms of CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, psychology, behavioral, they're all okay, but they're all parts. One
Mm.
of the things that I believe is the fundamental strength of what we offer here at Wisdom in Your Life is we have a comprehensive integrated framework of human functioning based on us as living organisms, right? And it's that sits right at the bottom, and it can place all of those things that I've just mentioned, right? Yeah, it can place NLP, it can place cognitive psychology, behavioral psychology, breath work, even energy work and stuff like that. It can place all of those within our framework. And when you have a framework that is so fundamentally comprehensive, then you can start to see, how do we actually function and where have people got themselves lost? And then
Yeah.
when you can see that, it's a case of, how can we help people back on that path?
Mm.
And that's the basis of what Ros has been doing for 25 years. It was the basis of my mentorship that was full on for 3 years, and what I do now. We do healing programs here. We also do Nature, Place and Purpose, which is a next level sort of leadership program of helping people to evolve. But the big two questions I'd ask is, where really, really, really are you on the journey of discharging the event that led you to want to get into this, and what is the framework, the underlying framework that you are using to navigate what you're doing with your clients.
They're super powerful questions to wind up on. I'm just going to go through some of the notes and summarizing when we're talking here about the.
I love it when you do this bit.
Hey, you like this
I
part?
love it when you do this bit.
Well, it helps me.
Very good listener. I always get
the wounded healer, as we say, the wounded healer wanting to save the world, as you've just said, get down to what triggered you, and that whole original triggering trauma that said that's why I want to do this work in the first place. But you make that beautiful point of emotional energy flow. That energy flows all the time, and the moment you block it is when you start to have problems, because if you're blocking it, it's going to actually accumulate, and eventually when the dam bursts, go, my God, I've spilt the paper clips, or I've had a car accident, or it could even be something minor that ends up triggering, let alone getting the sack from a job. And as you say, people have great intent, but it's then about the intent's not the question. What's the impact and the long-term impact? And most importantly, have you looked in the mirror and cleaned up? In other words, as you say, what's the healing story and what's the healing model that you're using, knowing full well that you are swimming in the swamp of emotions all the time. So as you say, healer, deal with it. And how is it? Acknowledge, express, release. And where is your comprehensive integrated model? So that's my summary there, Bryn.
Very good.
Yeah. So anything you'd like to say as we move into the home straight, mate?
No, not really. I think we've pretty much covered anything. Obviously, if anybody resonates with anything that I've said, whether they want to vehemently disagree or is interested, then by all means reach out. You can we can put a link to my LinkedIn.
Yep.
I can give you a link to a little video about how we get motion stuck. It's only like 2 minutes, and I can chuck a few more links to you that go beneath this. But no, I just want to thank you again, Lee, for opening the space to have this discussion, because I think it's really important. If we can align intent to impact, right, and make that of high integrity, and actually to do the job, then we can make significant headway with this ever looming and increasing emotional health crisis that we're facing, right? Yeah. And we can clean up a lot of stuff individually, collectively, in relationships, families, workplaces, the lot, right? But if we don't have this robust conversation, it's awesome that we've got as far as we've got. But if we're not having a robust conversation about whether intent is lining up to true impact, and also acknowledging that also business interests have come in, then we're going to go round and round in circles and make more mess than we had at the start.
Bryn, thanks so much for your time, mate.
Thank
Again,
you,
it all started with a chat at the coffee shop as part of our own social support network at Pod Squad, and now we've created this fantastic podcast. So we'll put your links in the notes at the bottom, and may the conversation continue. Again, folks, you want to touch base with Bryn, we'll put the LinkedIn in, and keep healing yourself so you can heal others.
Keep growing.
Thanks very much, mate. See you very soon. Bye.
Yeah.
Bye.